Hey, it's Fletch. Emergency services is a global thing, no matter where you are. Of course, we have 911 here in the U.S., but in the U.K., you've got 999, and across the EU, you've got 112 as the emergency number. Now, the mission with all of the centers is basically the same. Find out where the person is, get them the help that they need. But the problem for call takers worldwide is also the same. The networks were built based on your phone number living on your device and the phone company understanding where that phone number is. In the mid-'80s, that changed with the introduction of mobile phones. It got worse with residential voice over IP, and even today, in the enterprise world, enterprise devices can be located anywhere, yet carry their identity from their main office. Especially in times of COVID, thousands and thousands of workers are home with soft clients on their laptops. And while that might not be such an exposure, many people take their SIP phones, a physical telephone device, and locate that at their house. Now that's where it becomes problematic, because a 9-year-old child will see a phone, probably the coolest phone, they'll pick it up and dial 911 or 112 or 999, with all respect to my guest here today. And that call needs to be routed properly, and the location information of the device needs to be passed along to public safety. As most innovation starts, it comes from the people in the field that are working with the problems on a day-to-day basis. And joining me today is Nick Sutton, who is the founder of Emergency Locate. Now, Nick is an emergency call taker over in Scotland. And Nick, thank you for what you do. You are truly one of the first responders. And without you, nothing would happen. But you saw a problem daily, every shift, and you decided to fix it. Tell us about your innovation.
That's right, Fletch. Emergency call handlers certainly are the first responder, and it's a really powerful phrase, because without the processes that those guys work through, nobody's getting any help. It's very easy to be processing an emergency call, which is let's remember, that's a request for help in somebody that's more often than not involved in an emergency situation, having the worst day of their lives, and there is an expectation on that person that emergency services can provide the help that they need wherever they need it. So from a call handler's point of view, getting that key piece of information, the location, has never, ever been as critical as it is today, given some of the challenges they face around existing and additional technology that can sometimes complicate that issue. You talk about VoIP and connected cars, mobile phones, VPNs even. You have all of these tools that are parts of our digital lives now, but when we need to make an emergency call and that emergency call handler needs to process that information, it's not as clear as it perhaps should be. So over my career in the NHS in England and the ambulance service specifically, I've been frustrated by this problem, because I experienced it as a call handler when I was on the phones. I experienced it as a dispatcher deploying resources to those calls, and now as a manager for the ambulance service here in Scotland. I see those investigations and adverse incident reports where something didn't go as well as it could have done, and one of those reasons might be because we didn't have a clear enough understanding of exactly where to send the help. And given the tools that are available, tools that have been available for 15, 20 years, this isn't new technology. I set out to find a way to bring those tools to the people that need the most, which are the call handlers and emergency medical dispatchers, the first responders.
So what do you do that's different? I mean, I think the internet, all of a sudden exists today. And that's an additional path to carry information from the caller into the center, and also from the center into the first responders in the field. Because really, those are the people that need the information. You don't need to see the gory accident. Maybe you just need to see a snapshot of it, but it's not something you're going to watch necessarily. But the first responders can look at an accident, understand, we've got an overturned SUV. There's going to be an entrapment there. We need heavy rescue. Look at the fire. The fire is out of control. Let's respond to this side of the building. That's all great situational awareness, where we can literally start crowdsourcing all of these eyes out on the street and bring that into the situational response.
That's true. The additional information is certainly useful, but it's only useful if you've sent your resources to the right place, because you could have, perfectly possible these days, to have a live feed from a mobile phone or even a drone to see what's happening at the scene of an emergency. But if your call handler has not been able to correctly identify the location and sent the resources somewhere else altogether, that incident is not going to go well for your organization. And more importantly, those people aren't going to get the help that they need and the help that they asked you for. Additional information is super, but we've still got to get the basics right. And for a call handler, the basics always start with the location of the emergency.
So you're a center manager over in Scotland, obviously dealing with a lot of tragic emergencies. When you look at the application and you see it can save lives, but you look at the industry and the large corporations, how do you break down that wall? How do you break through that glass ceiling and get them to adopt or actually look at your solution? How do you get that out to agencies?
Yeah, that is a huge challenge, because as a homegrown developer, if you like, somebody that's fortunate enough to have some skills and be able to outsource the bits that I can't do to provide the solution that Emergency Locate provides, I'm really lucky to be able to do that. But I don't have the income revenue streams that some of the big players have, and so I'm reliant on my and others' experience of these problems, real world scenarios and examples that we've been involved in, and putting together a solution in a way that supports the staff in their control centers and supports those dispatchers to do the jobs that they're needed to do, but also organizationally, safeguard their mental well-being and mental health, providing them with the tools that they need to do the job. It's a difficult problem, and I like to solve problems, and by far the most enjoyable part of putting together this solution is solving the technical problems. How do I get these bits of internet to talk to these other bits of internet in this weird computer language that I've got to learn? I enjoy that stuff, but there's no point in me doing all of that work and pulling those solutions together if nobody's looking at it. So, I can harass people on Twitter for time and attention, and if you're on LinkedIn, then I'm coming for you.
By the way, that works. That's how I got Carrie's Law some attention, dialing 911. I harassed everybody on Twitter, and especially hotels. Keep up with social media, because it works.
Yeah, it does. I'm not short of people to speak to at the minute. Perhaps a bit too much. Getting the right person in the organization to speak to is one of the challenges. And what I find it easiest to talk to people who have a similar background to myself in those organizations, because we have a lot in common. We can relate to the work that we've done separately, sometimes on other sides of the planet, and I think that puts you across in a good light and makes clear your credibility, that you understand the problem. And then I introduce Emergency Locate and explain how we can solve the problem together, and in solving the problem, what that means for you as an agency, or what that means for you as an agency manager, or even as a call handler or a supervisor. I will speak to anybody that I can speak to about Emergency Locate. And some of the agencies I have worked with been introduced via a supervisor who's seen the potential and seen how it can solve those problems. We've worked together to put together a pack, some information that they've taken to their management, and we've got some time and then driven things forward that way. So being within the emergency services family really does help, but it does require an awful lot of time, effort, and energy. And it's not just something that I can throw some money at to make it happen, which it's not quite a frustration, because we're making progress at our own pace. But the end goal for me is to have people be able to access the tools that I've put together, because I know that they make a difference. And that's not just a difference to the public that are making the emergency calls and asking for help, but difference to the staff that are being asked to do a very, very difficult job. We need to make sure that they've got the tools to do those jobs. And that's not one tool that does some things quite well. CAD systems, for example, it's about enabling access to the right tool for the job. So be that emergency locate, rapid SOS, what 3 words, NG 911, or anything in between. My belief is that we should have a toolbox, and staff should be able to pick up the right tool for the particular job that they need to do, or the challenge that they need to solve.
Now, the premise of your tool, so to speak, at a very, very, very high level, you get an emergency call in, you've got the caller ID, you transmit an SMS text message to that device, and that contains a link. The user clicks on the link, and you grab the location services from the device and bring that back and put it in front of the dispatcher, plotted on a map. That's high level, right? Pretty simple.
It is pretty simple, and the ability to do that has been around for a long time. So
yeah, it has.
This isn't magic, but what we are doing is putting the processes together in a way that can be used by emergency operations center staff. Not only that, but applied my own experience of these problems and come up with a solution that means the information that's put in front of the dispatcher can be shared with responders, but the actual content of that information itself is the most useful information in terms of location. We're not just giving a 3-word address or coordinates. We're actually breaking that down into something that responders can place physically in the real world whilst they're responding to an incident in, under emergency driving conditions, which are stressful. So we make that as easy as we can. And if that incident is located somewhere off the beaten track, off the road network, remote, rural location, then we ensure that they've got all the information and all the tools to be able to transfer that location, if they need to, from their sat-nav in the vehicle to a handheld navigation device. But crucially, do all of that without anybody having to type in or translate or listen to or process a location. So with emergency locate, from start to finish, we can detect a location, process it through the control room, and share it with responders without anybody having to manually type or otherwise process it. And that reduces a whole heap of risks or potential for an error to be introduced, which if it does in a chain like that, it's often can result in delays, which, as we all know, seconds save lives in this sort of environment. And not just that, but also the credibility of these tools depend on them being accurate and reliable. And that's exactly how we've designed Emergency Locate to be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's important people understand what's actually happening here, because I'm going to say probably 10 years ago, at Avaya, we came up with a product called Locate, L-O-C, and the number 8, and basically did the same thing. Send an SMS, you click a link, and I suck the location back in. Back then, we had problems with different carriers, and we had problems with getting data over an internet connection while you're on a phone call. And the network wasn't quite ready, and we had a demonstration we had planned at a decent-sized center in New Jersey. And the night before, I had to call it off because we had Good Morning America showing up, and we did some testing. And it just turned out at the center, they had very poor coverage on one of the carriers for voice and data. And it would have been a total flop. And that was a hard thing to do. And, it's like, some people are saying, well, do we spoof it because we know it works? Absolutely not. Showing the real thing, or we don't show it at all. And we had to turn it down. But a lot of work needed to be done. And eventually, the networks changed, the carriers changed. I harassed them through the FCC, saying, why are you locking the phone when you dial 911? You can't make another phone call, can't get an incoming call. They were doing all kinds of crazy things. And because those rules were written when it was an analog voice cellular network, and those capabilities didn't exist. Now I've got multimedia, I've got text, I've got multiple modes that I need to accommodate during an emergency call. So those were the challenges. Your application is using the very same premise of what I built 10 years ago. But what you're doing is the other piece that I didn't even begin to address because I hadn't gotten past that mid-level. And that's the consumption of the information. You can't just deliver a pizza if somebody's not hungry. you're not doing any good, right? They've got to be able to consume and use that information. And that's why I think it takes somebody from your neck of the woods in the call chain. You've flown the desk, you've sat under the headset, you manage centers, you know the systems, you know what information is critical, you know what information you get that's not critical. I'm wearing blue socks. Well, good for you. You get the fashion award, but where are you bleeding, right? So it sounds like a silly example, but it takes public safety people to realize the use cases for the product. And when it comes down to the UI side of it, you need somebody that knows what they're talking about. And that's why I think you're going to be very successful. You're working at it from the public safety side back because the technology side has really been solved for 10 years. Getting location from a phone, not a big deal. It's just the way the cellular network does it is ridiculous. And that's why that's broken. That's a whole separate podcast in itself, right? But
well, definitely, we're much more fortunate these days with the advent of 4 and 5G that the bandwidth's available on the cellular networks to be able to do this kind of thing. But some of those challenges still exist, Fletch. So in Australia, for example, you make a 000 call, then your handset's locked. You can't do anything else on your handset. So much so that those guys have designed a new app with what 3 words this week. So if you launch the Call from the Emergency Plus app, then that's a way of bypassing that restriction on your phone, and those guys are using that to great success. But it is old technology used in a modern way to do the same thing that we've been trying to do for years. And I think, like you say, the crux of it is being able to provide the information in a way that means something to the call handler. Time and time again, as emergency services, we'll see, big tech come to us with a solution that they've thought of, but they went away and did it and didn't ask us. And, more often than not, it's unusable. We can't physically get it into the control room. So it's about finding ways to do that so that we can enhance the support to the staff that need it, to the call handlers and the dispatchers, but do so in a way that fits alongside their existing processes. We don't need to, or we don't want to ask them to change the way that they work, or even put another screen on the desk, because most desks you cannot fit another screen on there. Yep. So these solutions need to be brought to emergency services in a way that we can just pick them up and use them.
And that's what I like about the Rapid SOS interface, and even the Rapid Deploy interface. They're putting the additional data that they're getting from the location servers into the screen where they would normally get the cellular data, because it's coming through the similar mechanisms, whether it's cellular or not. We're using that mechanism to deliver it, so they put it in that screen. So that's what's nice about those products. It's not an extra window. It's additional data, or data from additional call types in an existing window. So now it becomes, that was the cellular location window. Now that's just the next gen location window, which happens to have a lot of cell phone calls, but any call could be there. There's a lot of apps out there that I've seen over the years. And one was, you could take a picture with your cell phone, and based on the directional information and the compass, all of that data is actually encoded in the picture. So now I get a cell phone taking a picture of smoke on the horizon, and I have another picture taking a picture of that same smoke, and I correlate that incident. I now go to my GIS and my Esri mapping, and I do a crosshair. I know exactly where that incident is taking place, even though it's 25 miles away in the middle of a forest. Data exists from applications all over the place, but it's never had a pathway into public safety. The final question I want to ask, and I think you're well qualified, probably the best qualified to answer this: how is this going to impact the call handler?
So the impact of the call handler is, it's probably around things they don't even realize. The mental health is priority for us, because I wouldn't develop these tools if I didn't think that they were needed. And as I say, call handlers might not even realize that that they've seen an impact, but we will all know as members of emergency services that we've taken, a job home with us in our minds, whether that's, I could have done better, I should have done something else, I didn't do what I needed to do on that call, and by providing the right tools for the job, then we overcome that and we make the difficult role easier. And, it doesn't necessarily matter to the call handler where they got the information from. It doesn't matter, which app they used, or whether we pinged a cell tower or read the GPS on the phone, or if they sent a text message and followed a link. None of that really matters to the call handler. They just want to help. They want to do the job that they need to do and find the location so that they can send the assistance that's needed. If we can make that easier, and I believe that we can, and that we should, then we should totally be able to do that.
Great answer. I mean, a good friend of mine, Tracy Eldridge, focuses on PTSD, and there's a big concern about dispatchers looking at severed heads and other things that are traumatic. But that's not going to be every call, right? It's like we thought text to 911 would overload the system. It's really very few calls that come in with that. You are going to have those traumatic calls. I know call takers work in their town. They take calls that ends up being their neighbor or even their own family. They're going to get a video call from their neighbor or their own family. And yeah, there's a potential for additional trauma there. So, but I think there's automation tools that we could employ, a little bit of intelligent call routing. I won't quite call it artificial intelligence, but you're logged into a system and I know where you live because you're an employee. I'm not going to give you a video call that's within 5 miles of your residence. That's going to immediately rule out 90% of any traumatic stuff you might see from someone you know. Sure, it could be someone across town, and I can't stop that right now. Maybe there's a way, I don't know. But again, what I hate about technology is we get into this mode. If you can't solve 100%, I don't want the utility. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, if I solve 80%, you're going to let 80 people die because you can't save 20. I think the 80 would be a little mad at you for that. But I see that tide changing. And I think that's digital natives. People, it's an age thing. I hate to bring the age thing, but people that have grown up with this technology in their hands are now coming into positions of management. And they're saying, you know what? Yeah, why not use this? I've used it all my life. Is it perfect? No. But you know what? It will help me on some. Controversial issue, but got to start.
I think it's a good point. And as we, as emergency services, look towards next generation technologies, there's a lot in there. We've talked about location today, but that's just part of it. Video certainly is coming to the emergency services without a shadow of a doubt. But you're totally right to mention that, because with next generation technology and emergency services, we've got to ask ourselves the question, why we're doing it. And the answer to that can't just be because we can. Because somebody's using a device that's got a camera to make a call does not mean that we should send the video from that camera to our call handlers, because those guys chose a job to work in a dispatch suite and not out on an ambulance or a police or a fire appliance. And if we're going to open that potential box of worms, then we need to make sure that we do so with appropriate training and support for their staff to be able to look at that new information. So I think it's a really strong case for not doing something just because we can. It's got to be relevant to that particular situation, and it's got to enhance the information that we already have about that call. And again, big tech might look at this and say, well, we've made a CAD that when they call the dials 999, we'll send a video straight away. And certainly here in Scotland, in the ambulance sector, our call handlers don't have any, there's not a requirement for them to see video because they are not clinicians. They're going to carry out a triage because we use ProQA and as part of MPDS. So they're going to ask the questions on the screen. Being able to see what happens at a call handler level isn't going to make any difference to the outcome of their job. But sure, we'll have advanced clinicians in the control room that might very well send you a text message with a link that opens up your camera. So we can judge whether or not we're going to send a helicopter with an advanced trauma team rather than an ambulance and get that person the right care that they need the first time, rather than send an ambulance that then asks for additional support and that advanced care is delayed. So there are uses, but it's got to be done in the right place. And I'm not convinced that big tech and the suppliers that are bringing this stuff to the emergency services, they don't know those intricacies. And actually, the guys at ENA in Europe, the European Emergency Number Association, doing some really good work with their technological working group and how big tech can interface to emergency services and ask those questions and make use of that experience. So that's something that's really interesting to follow as well at the minute.
So do you get the chance to talk to Gary Marciato?
Yeah, I talked to Gary. I actually last saw Gary hanging over the edge of a hotel balcony in Croatia, beer in hand, asking me to come up to the swimming pool, which declined. But yeah, I probably should have. It looked.
Well, next time you talk to Gary, tell him you talked to Fletch, and my message to him, he still doesn't know what he's doing. Gary, I talked to Gary when ENA was just getting going back in my days at Nortel, actually. And they were just really getting ENA off the ground. Gary's done incredible work over there, and I tease him all the time. You don't know what you're doing. They actually do. They do some great work. And they've got on their staff, they actually have Dimitri, who's a medical doctor, who's on their, executive board providing input. So, again, they're taking it from the right attitude. Great group of people. I'm glad you're involved with there. So, Nick, I really appreciate you sitting down. I'd like to sit down with you again when you've got some use cases to find and you've got some saves that you've been able to accomplish, and talk about what this tech is actually doing live in the field. You're welcome back anytime, my friend. Thanks very much for sitting down with me. Just off the night shift, too. So, late day for you.
Just ahead of the night shift, actually. But one thing I can share, we assisted a control center out in Ontario, Canada, recently.
Okay.
During their training, the supervisor happened to be in the control room, overheard a call whereby a vehicle had left the road into a water-filled ditch. So you have a sinking vehicle scenario. Caller couldn't describe the location, and the supervisor thought, "I know, I've got a tool for this. Let's give it a go."
There you
Use
go.
emergency locate, return the solution almost instantly, and definitely saved the life there. And that was not even out of training. So I'm really excited to see what the future brings and talk about some good news stories.
Great job, Nick. Kudos to you.
Thanks very much, and hopefully we'll have many more to talk about.
Okay. Well, I'll let you get ready for the night shift over in Scotland, and thanks very much for joining me via Zoom. This podcast is about thought leaders in the industry and thought leader technology. And you certainly fall into that bucket. Not because you invented something new, but you used technology that was there and invented new uses and user interfaces for that technology. And you did that with public safety in mind, making it consumable, usable, and most of all relevant. So great job. Great job, my friend. Looking forward to talking to you in the future.
Thanks very much, Fletch. You take care of yourself.
Well, that wraps up another podcast. My guest today has been Nick Sutton with Emergency Locate. If you want to find out more information, follow them on Twitter at Emergency Locate, or check them out on the web at emergencylocate.co.uk. Certainly an interesting product that'll bring in additional data and location information into emergency centers globally. This is Fletch. Thanks so much for listening. Remember, you can follow me on Twitter at Fletch911. Be sure to check out the rest of my blogs at Fletch.tv, where you can catch my brand new series, Next Gen 911 Future Makers. a new podcast series about building the next generation of public safety industry leaders. Once again, this is Fletch. Thanks so much for listening. Take care and have a great day.